Hi, everyone. Thank you for attending today's session. So today, SureCloud will go through our internal audit management solution in our GRC practice. Within this session, we'll go through a live demo of the product as well. So in today's session, it will be facilitated by myself and my colleague, Christian. So I am Yang. I'm the head of customer success and pre-sales here at SureCloud. Christian, my colleague, is joining us from the US. He sits in the pre-sales team and is a GRC SME. Before I go into the session itself, I'm just going to trigger a poll question we prepared, and we will review the outcome of this in the last 10 minutes of this session. The poll question has now been launched. And throughout this session, if you have any questions, feel free to write them in the group chat, and we will collectively go through all of the questions in the chat in the last 5 to 10 minutes of this session. Before I go into any details of our product, I just want to quickly highlight who we are as a company. So SureCloud was founded in 2006. As of today, we have more than 500 customers across Europe, North America, and Asia Pacific. Office location-wise, we're based in the UK as well as the US. So we have 2 offices in the UK. Our technical team and main office is in Reading, and our leadership and sales team sits in our London, Victoria office. So we offer 3 kinds of services. So the first one is GRC solutions, which is where myself and Christian work in. But other than that, we also offer cybersecurity services as well as risk advisory services. All of our services and offerings are based on the cloud, and we are a software as a service company. So within our GRC practice, we offer not only off-the-shelf products, but we can also build bespoke products for our customer. But out of the shelf, we have 6 key offerings, and they are third-party risk management, IT risk management, or cyber risk management, business risk management, that includes enterprise risk management as well as operational risk management. And then we have the compliance manager. We have a data privacy management solution as well, or GDPR solution, depending on what your need is. And then lastly, we offer audit management. So these 6 solutions we offer out of the box. And if the customer is happy with the best practice and framework we have embedded, we can simply switch it on, import the customer's data, and they can go live with it. So recently, we've decided to rebuild our audit manager because of new requirements as well as new technologies we have in our platform. So what you'll be seeing today is a newly released audit management solution that came out just before Christmas. So why would you go for an audit management solution, or particularly SureCloud's audit management solution? So first of all, one of the key business values we provide is our end-to-end audit manager sits within our GRC platform, so you can pull out data as well as push out data into the rest of the risk and compliance landscape. Additionally, our solution is or can be fully automated if required to help the business maintain a automated process that's aligned to the practice. So we can set up audit plans and allow the system to push out audit activities based on what's included in the plan. All of our data is real time, and we can pull that across not just audit, but into the wider integrated risk management piece as well if needed. We also allow the ability for audit universe to be generated, so we can store the scope or the entities we want to audit on an annual basis, so we don't have to create a new audit plan or new audit universe every time we decide to go through an audit. We also offer 2 types of audit approach. One is the standard work paper approach, as well as a questionnaire-based approach, which then may be directly aligned to certain regulatory requirements or certain regulatory output that you're looking for. Our entire solution is based by user, so permissions, access, what they can do is all based on how we want to set up our user and role groups. And the outcome of the audit can be exported as a proper audit report PDF, as well as any findings or any actions based on the findings can be aggregated to a corporate-wide level if needed and managed centrally in a centralized library across the business. So this is the last slide I'll go through before I hand it over to my colleague Christian to show the system. But what we want to highlight on this slide is out of the box in our GRC platform, we already have quite a bit of standard integrations. But if you're looking for something else that isn't available on this slide, we do have a integration hub, and the team sits in our Reading office in the UK, which we can build any APIs to target your existing systems as long as the system has an open API and is public facing. So in today's demonstration, we'll cover 5 key aspects of internal audit. The first one is a real-time audit management dashboard. And then we'll move into how you can set up an audit universe in our solution or audit entity in our solution. And then from there is how do I then plan my audit, as well as completing the audit. And then finally, if I have any findings and actions, how do I manage them? So that's going to be the flow of the demo. And throughout the demo, if you have any questions, like I mentioned earlier, just feel free to drop it as a question in the chat window, and we'll collectively go through that in the last 5 to 10 minutes of the session. On that note, I'm going to hand over to my colleague Christian to showcase the product.
Okay, so my screen should be shared. So as always, I first like to go ahead and start with the dashboarding reporting capabilities. So of course, we can report on really any data point within the system. More specifically, we're going to be looking at internal audit today. Is everything coming through all right yet?
Yeah, I think your voice is a bit distant. If you can move a bit closer to the microphone, that'd be great.
Yeah, sure thing. I'll speak up. So at the top of all of our dashboards, we have an intro and guidance as well as a quick access navigation section. So the internal audit overview dashboard is going to be the title, of course, but then we can also go ahead and put any sort of guidance to help end users navigate the dashboard, maybe speak to what's on it. And then to the right of that, we have the quick access. So that's going to be essentially a favorites area. So we can go ahead and put specific tiles or areas that are relevant to the internal audit solution to ease that navigation. Now, more specifically, as we look at some of the reports and the data that we're reporting on for internal audit, we can do things such as report on the finding summary. So if we want to look at all of the findings we've consolidated and then categorize those and group on the criticality ratings, we can do that. Same can be said with the statuses for any audits that we've deployed that are ongoing. We can very easily go ahead and group on those statuses and see exactly how many are finalized versus maybe how many are still in the drafting and prep stages. So we can very easily see exactly the status for each of those audits. We can go ahead and look at how many audits we've deployed versus not deployed. And then we can also break it up by the actions and exceptions that we've raised off the back end of those audits as well. Each of these are drillables. If I wanted to see exactly which 3 we're going to be within that race stage, we can go ahead and see that as well as navigate to them. And then lastly, we have a simple grid report at the bottom. So we can go ahead and easily go ahead and look at all the audits within the grid view. And each of these attributes can be filtered and sorted on as well. As far as getting data out of the system, functionally, we can do it in a few different ways. So if I wanted to get this report specifically, I can copy that image. I can also download it into a few different file formats, so CSV, Excel, and PDF. And then also we can utilize a managed resource link to allow us to report on the data within SureCloud and other reporting tools such as Tableau or Power BI. And the last thing I want to highlight for the dashboarding and reporting capabilities is the ability to go ahead and schedule exports. So if I open up the navigation bar and then go to the email internal audit overview dashboard, I can choose exactly who I want to schedule this export out to, the frequency at which I want to do it. So maybe we need this at a monthly cadence. I can set that the day and even the time more specifically, and then I can draft that message and that'll be set out at that cadence. So the next area we're going to be looking at is that audit universe, or more specifically, the entities that we're going to be auditing. So using the quick access navigation, I can easily jump over to that area. And just like the previous page, we're going to have an intro and guidance, so we can provide a title, any guidance needed to navigate this page, as well as quick access navigation, so we can jump to areas that are relevant to this page very easily. Below that, we'll have all the entities that we've defined that we're going to be auditing. Now, entity can be anything from a business unit to a specific process or an asset or an area. So really anything that we're going to be auditing. If you're going to be creating an entity, it's as easy as going up to the action here, clicking on create an auditable entity. From there, that's going to generate a new one. We can begin to fill out those details. Otherwise, what we can do, if we're going to just review one that's already been created, is click into any of the examples down below. So in this case, we'll look at the disaster recovery plan. And at the top, we'll have the workflow, very straightforward. So we'll have the key details, which are provided in the 2 sections below. We'll go through a risk assessment. So we have a few different ways to assess this entity as far as risk is concerned. And then we have the scope and cycle before it becomes active. Below that, we have a unique identifier as well as the title for this entity. And then we get into the key detail section. So once we're going forward with the workflow and starting in that key detail section, you'll have some high-level information such as the name, assigning any individuals that are going to be responsible for it, so the audit manager or the owner. Next is identifying what type of risk assessment you would like to utilize. So you have the simple risk assessment, which is going to be just filling out the impact and likelihood. And then a full assessment is going to be a more built out one-page approach looking at the inherent and residual impacts and likelihoods. Below that, we'll be able to provide a short description of the entity. And then lastly, for the key details section, we'll be able to identify all of those contacts that are going to be associated with this. If they're a platform user, we can go ahead and flag that as yes, and then that'll allow us to grab that user from the system and pre-populate the rest of the information, such as the email and a mobile telephone number. Then we can fill out the role as needed. Otherwise, if you would like to add someone who's not in the system, you can also do that as well and fill that out as a free text field. The next section is going to be doing that risk assessment. So in this example, we're taking the simple risk assessment approach. So we'll fill out the impact and the likelihood for this entity. That's going to get rolled up into a rating for us. And if we'd like to override that rating for whatever reason, we can do that as well. After the risk assessment, we'll move on to the scope of the entity. So in this case, we're looking at a business process that we're going to be auditing. So you would choose that, and then you can go ahead and then more specifically choose the process that you want to go ahead and relate to this entity. Otherwise, we could also choose a few other options, right? It doesn't just have to be a process. It could be assets, controls, risks, and you can add to this list as well. And we'd be able to pull that information over to the table below. Below that, we have the cycle. So it's going to tell us the frequency based off of that risk rating that we had calculated. So since it's a critical, maybe we're going to want to audit this entity quarterly. Otherwise, if you want to override that, we do provide that capability. Then the last 2 sections are the associated findings and actions and exceptions. So in this case, there's no findings tied to this one specifically, but there is an action that had been identified. So we can very easily go ahead and consolidate that view in both of those sections. So navigating back, I can use the breadcrumbs to do that very easily. The next area we're going to look at is the audit plan. So how are we going to group these audits? Within the audit plan register, just like the other 2 pages, right, we're going to have intro and guidance as well as the ability to provide any sort of quick access navigation. And then below that, you'll see all the plans we've created. So in this case, we have a few different examples. So we could break it up by year over year. So if you want to have an audit plan for 2021, 2022, maybe it's for a specific area like HR, or maybe you want to do it quarterly. Really, whatever scenario you want to run with, you can break it up and group on those accordingly. So if you wanted to create an audit plan, you can very easily do that just like the other page, right? So we can use an action to create that audit plan, and that will allow you to generate a new audit plan and then begin to detail out all those audits and entities that are relevant to that plan. Otherwise, if you would like to adjust a plan that's already been created or review one, you can do that by clicking into one of the examples below. So we'll go with the 2022 audit plan. At the top, of course, we're going to have that title for the audit plan. And then we'll go into some of the high-level details for it. So in this case, we'll provide a name, an owner. We'll be able to go ahead and detail out the start and end date, as well as a description. then more importantly, the audit manager is going to be able to come in and actually define what entities and audits they would like to carry out for 2022. So in this case, we'll have a disaster recovery plan. We'll be able to provide a description. We can categorize it by type as well as associate that entity from the entity register. We can then go ahead and provide the start and end dates for that audit and then assign any auditors that are going to be responsible for that specific audit. The last section is going to be the ability to deploy or move it. So if you want to go ahead and deploy it, you would check that box or that circle there. Same to be said with moving it. If you wanted to move it to another plan for whatever reason, you have that availability as well. And then you would deploy it. Otherwise, if it's already been deployed, you can just click on open and easily navigate to that specific audit. And you can have one of many different audits here. It doesn't just have to be that disaster recovery example we pointed out. So you can have as many audits as you'd like to put into that plan as you'd like. So for this example, we'll jump into the disaster recovery plan audit. And we'll be presented with the audit page. So we'll have a very simple workflow at the top. For the drafting and ready stages, it's really going to be prepping that audit, preparing for the audit. So we'll begin by filling out the audit details. So we'll have all this information pre-populated for us. We've already filled that out on the previous page, so it'll pull that over. We'll then go ahead and detail any objectives for the specific audit. And then we can get into scheduling. So in this case, we're looking at one specific process. So we'll be able to schedule that, assign the auditor and participant that's going to be responsible for that specific scheduling task, as well as relate that entity to it. And based off the scheduling, that'll go ahead and generate a specific work paper. Now, it's also within this stage that we're going to be identifying how we want to go about carrying out this scheduling task. So do we want to utilize work papers, or do we want to take a more questionnaire approach? So you can define that as well. In this case, we have a work paper example. So once you go ahead and create that task, we'll be able to generate that work paper. And then within the next stage, which is actually beginning the audit, those individuals be notified to come in and begin their work. And the auditor will be able to click into this work paper and begin carrying out the audit. So you'll have all the high-level details or key details within that section below. So we'll be able to see exactly what the entity is, the description, as well as the ownership and frequency. We can begin to outline any of the testing steps that we're going to carry out. And then for each of those testing steps, and as we begin to collect evidence supporting that, we can go ahead and reference those steps, provide a description for the samples that were collected, and then of course attach those to those samples as well. If there was any failed steps, we can go ahead and flag that for each of the samples. And then we'll move into our findings. So as you're going through the audit, if you identify any findings, you can add one of many different findings here within this section, and then also go ahead and flag whether or not you'd like to include it. So maybe it's just an observation versus an actual finding. You can very easily determine that as well. And then lastly, we have the conclusion for the work paper. So what was the overall conclusion for this? You can go ahead and provide any details, justification around that before wrapping up the work paper section. So jumping back, the next area is going to be looking at an example for the questionnaire approach. So we've looked at the work paper. So I'm going to jump over to a financial audit example where we took a questionnaire approach. So you can see in this case, we were looking at specific controls versus a process where within the scope of assignment, we've gone ahead and we have two questionnaire approaches and two work paper. Let's go down to the questionnaire section. We'll be able to see how that looks. So instead of taking the work paper approach, we can go ahead and take a more assessment approach. So we can identify the questions we'd like to ask. So has the control been implemented? Is it operating correctly? You can also go ahead and define your own questions or choose from a standard library that we do provide. But if you'd like to add any questions, you can just click on add there, and you can ask your own custom questions as well. You can attach any supporting evidence, detail any comments, as well as raise any findings as well. Going back to that main example. The last few sections here, we're going to have the evidence collected. So within that sample section, it's going to consolidate all of the attachments or samples provided into this evidence section so we can easily digest that information. The same can be said with the findings. So as you raise findings, it's also going to go ahead and consolidate that into this section below. And then the next stage is looking at the reporting. So as you've finalized the questionnaires and work papers, we're able to generate a report of that. So I click on the open report button here. what that's going to do is display all the information we've collected in the format that is going to be reported on. So you can see all the contact details, the background objectives for the specific audit that we had already outlined. We can see an executive summary. So it's going to give us the classification, husband training if there's been multiple audits over time for this specific area. Then we can go ahead and get a count for the actions, exceptions, and findings, as well as the associated criticality rating for each of those. We'll be able to look at the scope as well as the findings that we found, but in more detail. It's not just a count, right? So it's going to go ahead and actually provide us with the details for that specific finding that we had raised. And then we have the appendix sections. So we can look at the actions, exceptions, as well as the assurance ratings. And then lastly, if there's any changes made, we can track that in the change control section at the bottom. When that's all said and done and you like the way that the reporting page is formatted, what we can do is go to the top and download a report. And that will actually generate a Word document where we can go ahead and have that export and provide it to whoever's needing this document. So navigating back to the main page here. Once the reporting's done, the last step is going through the approvals. So we'll be able to go ahead and sign off on the specific audit that we've carried out. So those approvers will be notified to be able to approve their acknowledgements. And you can track those changes within this section. And then lastly, we'll have the follow-up actions and exceptions. So as you've raised actions and exceptions that be brought up to this level, we can go ahead and manage those as well. Just navigate to them as needed. And that is the internal audit solution. I will hand it back over to Yang, and we can begin to look at some of the questions that have come through.
Thank you, Christian. Let me just share my screen now.
Yeah.
So first thing I'll do is, let me just end the poll question first. So it seems like 61% of the participants has answered. Looking at the results, so the question is around whether today your business utilize a fully automated or integrated audit solution that has the potential or is actually linked to your risk and compliance data. And it seems 62% of the 13 that answered said no, and that the solution today is neither integrated or automated. So that's fine on its own, because historically we know that out there are quite a few audit manager solutions. The only challenge that we face today in the internal audit world is, as business try and break away the data silos and the vertical information transfer between functions, it becomes more of a manual task than to loop back the outcomes of audit into the wider risk and compliance landscape. So ideally, you would want your internal audit system to either integrate with your risk and compliance system or sits within risk and compliance system, so that with the output of your audit, you know what compliance areas needs revisiting, or controls needs modifying, or needs reassurance or testing, as well as understand what kind of risks are being exposed from the wider risk management side. So we know what kind of business challenges we'll face if these risks are not mitigated or treated on time. Just conscious of time, we have 5 more minutes left, so let me move on to the Q&A stage. So let me look at the chat window. We've got right now quite a few questions. So I'll start with Carol, because that came in first. So are auditors notified when each audit is deployed from the audit plan? Yes, so what you saw earlier is the end-to-end demonstration of how the system orchestrates the process in the back end. The reality is, by defining who your lead auditor is and having the rest of the auditees assigned in the plan, when the plan is deployed, the end user will be notified via email as well as on their dashboard. There are specific audit activities, and they just go via the hyperlink or that highlighted button in the system, and they'll just go into their activity straight away. So they would not need to navigate to the details through the plan page itself. And then Michael asked a question, are you able to audit risk as well as controls? Yes, so we are able to audit risk directly. However, because this is an integrated solution, we already know in the back end what risks the controls are mitigating. So we can pull that information out indirectly. But if there's any specific reasons that you want to look at the risk posture of the area of interest, we can also set up work paper as well as questionnaires to support that. So all of that is just a switch on ability that's hiding out actually on the background. And then a part now asks the question whether, how and where are we mapping risks to the work that has been performed? So again, if we go with a standalone audit solution from SureCloud, we will offer you a simplified library of your risk and controls, which you can import. If it's integrated to the wider risk and compliance offering we have, the system's intuitive enough to know the relation between assets, processes, risk and controls, so that when you define a business area, a regulation, or process to audit, it can pull in all the underlying risks and controls, so that if we decide based on a questionnaire or looking at specifically from a work paper approach, a control's not, performing as effective as we hoped, then the risk owner that the control is trying to mitigate is also notified that a control has actually failed or isn't operating in the effective way we want. So they can then take actions from the risk side to see if they need to find alternative ways of treating that risk. I think we have one more question from Steen on how much of testing can be filled automatically with your out-of-box solution. So it depends. If you have any other mechanism, or if your control is an automated control, we can create integration so that we can pull out the outcome based on sample size directly from an external system. But if you're managing the control testing internally in the GRC solution, then you will have to populate those in the work paper manually. What we do have is the questionnaire approach does automate the understanding between, questions against risk and control. So we can define the questions in the questionnaire and map them against different areas of risk and control. So what will happen is, depending on how you answer them, it might trigger that a control is non-effective. So a good example is if you're taking an audit approach based on any certification you may have, or based on any standards that you are following, such as NIST or ISO 27005, you can tailor your question library in a way that addresses the questions in those guidelines. And then that will make it very easy for you to map each question to the ISO or NIST controls you have in the backend. So by answering those questions, the system will automatically trigger notifications, as well as warnings to the controls associated that more action needs to be taken. And we can even escalate that to be manager level reporting or leadership reporting to tell you a section of what you're trying to follow or what you're trying to certify against isn't compliant at this stage. Unless there's any more questions, then I will move down to the last slide we have, and conscious that we're already on time. So the last slide we have is just details of myself and Christian, in case you want to reach out. And also what we want to highlight is there are further sessions, webinars, or demos that SureCloud is hosting in February. So we look forward to you joining those sessions as well, if you're interested. Well, thank you so much for your time, and wish you a lovely afternoon and evening. Thank you. Bye.